Loretta hadn't answered her door after dark since Cyrus died, but the headlights through the blizzard looked like drowning men signaling for shore. When she pulled back the curtain, 20 motorcycles sat dying in her driveway, their riders already turning blue beneath a sky that meant to kill them. She was 74 years old. Her bones ached in weather like this, and the smart thing would be to call 911 and let professionals handle men with leather cuts and road-worn faces. But the smart thing and the right thing had never been the same in Loretta's experience. Cyrus always said cold was the cruelest killer because it made giving up feel like sleep. She opened the door. "Ma'am," the one in front had ice in his beard and no feeling left in his voice, hypothermia stealing everything but survival instinct. "Truck jackknifed on 87, closed 20 miles both directions. We got—" He looked back at his brothers, some of them barely standing. "We got nowhere." "Well," Loretta cinched her robe tighter against the knife wind, "I got 4,200 square feet and a furnace that works overtime. Get your machines in the barn and your bodies in my living room. Move." She didn't wait to see if they followed. 20 years married to Cyrus had taught her that men like this responded to authority delivered clean. You didn't ask, you told, and if you told with enough certainty, they'd follow you into the dark. The bikers filled her house like a river finding its level. They dripped snow melt onto the hardwood Cyrus had installed himself, left boot marks on the rug her mother had given them as a wedding gift, tracked road grime into corners that hadn't seen a stranger's feet in nearly 2 decades. Loretta didn't care. She was already in the kitchen, lighting every burner, putting water on for coffee in every pot she owned. "Ma'am, you don't have to—" "Loretta," she didn't turn around. "Mrs. Hargrave if you need formal, and I don't do anything I don't choose to do. Sit before you fall." She heard him sit. They came in waves over the next hour, the ones who'd stayed with the bikes until the barn could shelter them, the ones who'd gotten separated and followed tracks through the snow. 23, final count, all wearing the same patch, Broken Crown MC, Nebraska chapter. Some faces barely old enough to grow a full beard, others who'd clearly seen more road than should fit in one lifetime. Loretta made coffee, then soup from whatever cans she could find, chicken noodle, tomato, beef barley, all mixed in the same pot because warmth mattered more than coherence. She found every blanket in the house, including the wool one that still smelled like Cyrus even after 18 years, even though that was probably just memory lying to her grief. "You live alone out here?" The one who'd spoken first, road captain she'd guess from the way others looked to him, accepted his 3rd cup of coffee like it was communion wine. 18 years now. "Your husband?" "Buried in the back plot. Always said he wanted to see the road from wherever he ended up." The road captain studied her with eyes that calculated 1,000 risks. "You always take in strays, Mrs. Hargrave?" "Loretta, and I don't take in strays. I take in people who need taken in. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Strays, you do it for yourself, feeling good, feeling holy. People in need, you do it because not doing it would make you someone you couldn't live with." Something shifted in his face. Recognition, the acknowledgement of one type seeing another. "Deacon," he said, extending a hand that still trembled from cold, "and I believe I understand exactly what you mean." By midnight, the storm had buried the windows halfway up. The power flickered twice but held. Loretta sat in her rocker by the fireplace, the chair that faced Cyrus's empty chair, the one she still couldn't bring herself to move, and watched 23 bikers do something she never would have predicted. They cleaned. Without being asked, without fanfare, they washed their own coffee cups, dried them, returned them to cabinets they'd seen Loretta open. They found the mop, traced their own boot prints backward, erased the evidence of their intrusion.
One of them, young, barely 20, with a fresh prospect patch, caught her watching and shrugged like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You don't trash the house of someone who opens their door," he said. "Road code." "You got a name, Prospect?" "They call me Crow." He said it like he was still getting used to wearing it, because I was dumb enough to get a giant crow tattooed across my chest before I learned anything about symbolism. What's a crow symbolize to you people? Death, carrying souls between worlds, bad omens. He grinned, young and sheepish. I thought it just looked cool. Loretta laughed, a sound so rusty from disuse it startled her more than it did him. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed out loud. "Cyrus would have liked you," she said, without thinking. He always appreciated someone willing to admit their own stupidity. Crow's eyes snagged on something across the room, the mantel, where the photos lived, her and Cyrus at the wedding, Cyrus with his truck, Cyrus in his shop. And one photo she'd forgotten was there. Cyrus, young, 40 years before he became the man she married. Leather, patches, a motorcycle chrome perfect in Oklahoma sunshine. "Loretta," Crow's voice changed. "Your husband, what was his full name?" "Cyrus James Hargrave. Why?" Crow was already moving toward Deacon, already speaking low and urgent, other heads turning, eyes finding that photo, then finding her, then widening with something she couldn't read. Deacon crossed the room with the careful purpose of a man approaching sacred ground. "Mrs. Hargrave, your husband, Cyrus Hargrave, did he ever go by another name before he was your husband?" "I don't," but she stopped, because she did know. She'd found it once in a box of his things after the funeral, a name scrawled on the back of a photograph she didn't recognize. "Prophet," she said quietly. "Someone called him Prophet once, in a letter I found. I never knew what it meant." The silence was absolute. Even the fire seemed to stop crackling. "Jesus Christ!" Deacon's voice was barely a whisper. He pulled out his phone, stepped toward the window, started making calls despite the hour. Other bikers doing the same, the living room becoming a command center for something Loretta didn't understand. "You ever notice how the people closest to us carry whole lives we'll never see?" 20 years of marriage, and Loretta had thought she knew Cyrus, his calluses, his coffee order, the way he'd hum Johnny Cash when he thought no one was listening. But here were strangers treating his name like scripture, making calls at 3 in the morning because of a photograph on the mantel. If you've loved someone and later discovered pieces of them you never knew existed, you understand what her chest felt like in that moment. Like a door opening to a room you didn't know was there. By 3 a.m., Loretta had pieced together fragments from whispered conversations, heads-together conferences. Occasional looks shot her way like she might shatter. Deacon finally came to her, sat in Cyrus's chair without asking, which should have bothered her but didn't. Some things transcended house rules. 42 years ago, Deacon said, a man called Prophet helped found one of the largest motorcycle clubs in the country. He was the club's conscience, the one who kept things from going too far, the one who remembered we were supposed to be about brotherhood, not just territory. Loretta listened. The fire popped. 35 years ago, Prophet found out leadership had gotten into business with genuinely evil people. Trafficking, not drugs, people, kids. Deacon's jaw tightened. Prophet couldn't stop it from inside, so he did something nobody had done before or since. He gathered evidence, fed it to the feds, brought down the leadership, saved those kids, and blew up his entire life in the process. "He was a rat," Loretta said, flat, testing. "He was a hero." Deacon met her eyes, but there was no way to tell that story at the time, not without the club tearing itself apart. So Prophet disappeared, new name, new life, and the official story became that he'd left in disgrace, that he'd betrayed brotherhood for money. "He never had money," Loretta's voice cracked. "We scraped by every year."
Because he gave back everything the feds offered, every cent of witness protection money. Said he didn't do it for payment. Deacon's voice roughened. That's who your husband was, Mrs. Hargrave. That's the man whose legacy you continued tonight, letting 23 strangers into your home without knowing what you were carrying forward. Loretta looked at the photo on the mantel. Cyrus, young, unbroken, riding toward a future that would cost him everything familiar. He never told me. He was protecting you. If anyone knew who you were, where he was, Deacon shook his head. Took years for the club to sort truth from lies. By the time we understood what Prophet really did, he was gone. We'd been looking for his family for 8 years, just to say thank you, to make things right. And then we rode into your driveway by accident, Crow from across the room, voice thick with something too large for words. Not accident, Loretta thought. Cyrus always said there was no such thing, just roads you hadn't found the reason for yet. She must have slept. She didn't remember lying down, but she woke in her bed with sunlight slicing through curtains and a sound rolling through the floor like thunder that wouldn't stop. Motorcycles. Not 20, not 100, 1,000, maybe more. Loretta wrapped herself in a robe and walked to the front window. Her driveway, her road, her fields, every inch covered in chrome and leather and faces she'd never seen. Men and women as far as the horizon, engines idling in a growl that shook the glass. She opened her door to find Deacon on the porch, flanked by a man she didn't recognize. Older, gray-bearded, wearing patches that marked him as someone who answered to no one. Mrs. Hargrave, the gray-bearded man removed his sunglasses. His eyes were wet. My name is Stone, national president of the Broken Crown. My father was one of the men Prophet saved when he brought down the old guard. He paused. My mother was one of the kids they'd trafficked. Loretta gripped the doorframe. We sheltered your brothers last night, opened your home when you didn't know who they were or what they might do. That alone would earn our gratitude. Stone's voice carried in the cold air, and somehow she knew the 1,000 riders were hearing every word. But you are also the widow of the man who gave up everything, reputation, brotherhood, the life he'd built because he couldn't live with looking the other way. We're 17 years late, but we're here to say his debt to this club is paid, his name is clean, and you, Mrs. Hargrave, Loretta, you're family now for the rest of your days. We all carry things for people who are gone. We finish sentences they started, live by codes they taught us, love in patterns they carved into our hearts. And sometimes, if we're lucky, we get to see that it mattered, that the way they lived echoed past their death into rooms they never entered, into lives they never touched directly. Maybe you're carrying something like that, someone's legacy you didn't ask for but can't seem to set down. If so, you know what Loretta felt standing on that porch, the weight and the grace of it, how sometimes inheritance isn't money or land, it's becoming worthy of the story. The riders stayed 3 days. They fixed the fence Loretta had been meaning to repair for a decade. They cleared the gutters. They rebuilt the barn door that hadn't hung right since the ice storm of '09. They sat with her through meals, trading stories about Cyrus, no, Prophet, that she'd never heard. The time he'd ridden 600 miles through a hurricane to be at a brother's deathbed. The way he'd settled disputes with words when everyone else reached for violence. How he'd once given his bike, to a stranger whose daughter needed surgery money. He told me that bike was stolen, Loretta said, and the table erupted in laughter that was also grief, also love, also the specific joy of speaking someone's name and seeing others light up at the sound. On the third morning, as the riders prepared to leave, Crow pressed something in her palm. A patch, Prophet's patch, worn and faded, but unmistakable. This was supposed to be buried with him, Crow said. The club's been holding it, waiting to put it where it belonged. Loretta looked at the cloth in her hand. a story she'd never known she was part of, a man she loved who was also a stranger. Why didn't he tell me? Crow shook his head slowly. Maybe he wanted you to know him without the legend, without all this. He gestured at the departing bikes. Maybe he wanted one person to love just Cyrus, not Prophet, just the man. Loretta's throat closed around words she couldn't speak. That night she did something she hadn't since the funeral. She took out the box of Cyrus's things, the one she'd opened once and couldn't bear to look at again. There was more inside, so much more. Letters from strangers thanking him for things she didn't understand, photos of faces who clearly loved him, and a journal, handwritten, spanning years before they met. She read the last entry, dated 2 days before the stroke that took him. Elle doesn't know who I was, what I gave up. She just knows who I am, a man who loved her for 20 years, who built a life in the ruins of an old one. Sometimes I think about telling her, but here's the truth I've found. Love doesn't need to know everything. It just needs to stay. And she stayed, through my silences, my nightmares, my flinching at certain sounds. If I go before her, I hope she understands that the man she married was trying every day to be worthy of the life she gave him. And I hope whoever she becomes after I'm gone keeps opening doors to people who need it. That's the code. That's the only church I ever believed in. That's Prophet's real legacy. Not me. Her. Loretta closed the journal, sat in Cyrus's chair for the first time since he died, let her body settle into the groove his body had worn. Outside, the porch light, off for 18 years, flickered on without her touching it. Something in the wiring, probably, or something else. She chose to believe it was something else. The road doesn't care about your reasons, only your choices. It doesn't matter if you ride on 2 wheels or 4, or if you've never straddled a motorcycle in your life. What matters is what you do when someone's freezing in your driveway, what you choose when kindness costs something, who you become when no one's watching and nothing's promised in return. If you've ever opened a door when closing it would have been easier, you already know the only code that matters. And if you haven't yet, the door's still there. The choice is still yours. Loretta never learned to ride, but she understood the code better than most who did. You carry the people who carried you. You keep the door open. You remember that inheritance isn't what you did. It's what lives on in whoever you loved well enough to change. Some nights she still brews coffee for 2 before remembering, and every time headlights cut through dark towards her driveway, she opens the door without hesitating. That's the inheritance. That's the road.